Hey, welcome to Pianist Academy. I'm Charles Szczepanek. Welcome to another live stream. I see we have a handful of people here already, so drop a hello in the chat if you could. And let's see who we have tuning in today. Welcome if you're new. And we do these about every 2 weeks, the second and fourth Wednesday of every month at this time. Sparrowhawk, hello Sparrowhawk, and Antonio, hello Antonio. Sparrowhawk, can you let us know where you're tuning in from? Antonio's tuning in from Mexico, and OCD King is here again. Just let me know if that, I don't know if that's what your screen name is about, but that's what I've chosen to call you. If that bothers you, just tell me and I'll change. Sparrowhawk, thanks for sharing. The Netherlands, awesome. Awesome, and Julio is here. Welcome, Julio. Welcome back. It works for you, OCD. All right, awesome. I have a different kind of coffee this morning because it's, at least in the States, we're having quite the heat wave here. So it's been in the 90s in Colorado for me, and family and lots of people that I know that live in Phoenix are really suffering. I got a picture from a car from my sister saying it was 131 degrees. That's just crazy. So anyway, I have iced coffee today, not my usual hot. Scott Weaver, hello, Scott. You say it's very warm in southern New Mexico also. Awesome. So today, I guess I'll hit a quick bit of news, and then everything today is open. So quick bit of news. There's an extra link in the description today because I have a new EP coming out on Friday this week. So there's a link in the description to pre-save the EP. And the music is... Let's say if you're a fan of Ludovico Einaudi, I think you'll like what's on the EP. It's all original stuff. It's kind of in the easy listening, can be played in the background kind of stuff. There's 6 songs on there. If that's something you're interested in, I would be so grateful if you would go and click the link below to pre-save on whatever platform of your choice. It really helps me out. So if that's something that you're into, different than classical music that we usually are talking about here on the channel, but if it's something you're into, I'd really appreciate it. So that link is in the description below. Hello, Miguel. And so that's first bit of news. Second bit of news, and this will kind of take us right into everything else we're going to chat about today. The last 2 months or so, there has been a masterclass segment that's kicked off our live streams, just about every stream, I think, for 2 months, which is awesome. That streak has broken today. Today is purely a Q&A session open to anything all the way from the top. But if you are in the future interested in sending a video in to have a masterclass segment on a live stream here, there is that information always in the description below. Sometimes I don't get to say that right at the beginning of the video, the beginning of the stream. So if that's something you're interested in, I know there's a lot of people that tune in that I haven't gotten a chance to hear you play yet. None of us have gotten a chance to hear you play. So if you're ever interested in doing that, and getting some feedback, you can just follow the directions that are in the description below. And Antonio, Julio said you're a huge fan of Ludovico Einaudi. Well, awesome. I hope you'll pre-save my EP. And Antonio was going to ask what I think of Einaudi. Well, why don't we use that to kick off our Q&A today? So, because there's no masterclass, we're going to dive in. The whole time that we're together is open to any questions that you might have. So feel free, drop them in the chat. And we can go from there. We'll start with Antonio and see where this leads today. So, what do I think of Einaudi? Miguel, thank you. Oh, awesome. Miguel, what chat? Could you just type in where you found it? Oh, maybe that was my other channel. I was gonna say. Well, thank you for finding it and hearing it. I appreciate that, Miguel. So let's see. Einaudi. I have a couple things of his on my iPad that we can use to kind of dive into things. But overall, this might not come as a surprise to many of you and might come as a surprise to some of you. But I enjoy a whole lot of music that's not just the classical canon. That is what we spend a lot of time talking about here, the great composers, and a lot of that wonderful music that is classical music But I also, man, I listen to all kinds of stuff. And Einaudi is music that I tend to put on. I really like it. And it's not always the most interesting thing to listen to, but if I want something to put on in the background that's not going to distract me, like all classical music will if I'm working on something, and I want something to listen to that's really beautiful and pleasant, that I can continue working, then I will absolutely put Einaudi on and some other things. And that's a bit of why I wrote the EP that's coming out on Friday. Yeah, so we'll start with that, and then let me pull up. Oh, I have a couple things of Einaudi on here. Maybe you all know. Oh, I hope I don't get a copyright strike for this. So I'm not going to play any more than that. But that's one of his most famous. The thing that I love about Einaudi, and I have actually a number of students that like playing his stuff, I'll divide this into two parts. As a composer, I think he's actually kind of brilliant in that he can take something that's so simple and keep developing it. And that's really, really amazing. And it doesn't need to go very far. He doesn't need, I'm sure he could if he wanted to write some incredibly complex stuff. But he doesn't choose to do that. Yet it keeps evolving, and it keeps evolving over the course of 4 or 5 minutes. And I think that is a composer that knows how to do that and knows how to take the simplest idea and not make it too complex too quickly. That takes a lot of knowledge and takes a lot of control over your craft. And so I really appreciate that about his music. As a composer myself, there was when I was maybe 10 years ago when I was writing, there was a brief phase where I was like, I'm going to write something and it's going to be as complicated as I can make it. And that didn't last very long because it's actually a lot more challenging as a composer to write something that the notes only serve the purpose that the underlying purpose of the music. Now that's something I feel that Einaudi does really, really well. Just a quick hello to Jose and Bachward's Fellow. Hello, you two. Sparrow, I saw. I briefly saw a message about Nessun Dorma from you. If you want to type that in again, feel free. I didn't get a chance to read it. So Miguel, you know that piece because you played what I just played. And Antonio, you asked, how would you compare Einaudi to Philip Glass or Penguin Cafe? I'm not familiar with Penguin Cafe. Philip Glass, I feel like, is more experimental, and that can be really nice. It can be more interesting, I guess, to listen to. I would compare Einaudi more to Max Richter, I think, if we're going to compare him to like someone who's more considered a contemporary classical composer. I would put Max Richter in more of the same vein than Philip Glass. We have a question here. So I feel like we've. Let us know. If you like Einaudi, drop it in the chat, and we can always come back to that. But let me hit these next. Oh yeah, let's see. So Sparrow, you typed back in here. Is Nessun Dorma is the same as the Music Notes one. If it's got my name on it, it's the same one. There might be a couple variations out there, but there aren't too many. A Bachward's Fellow, yes, I'm having iced coffee today. When I actually drink some. Yes, iced coffee because it's so warm. Let's see. I'm just going to call you username. Username asks, how to improve sight reading without looking at the keyboard? That's a great question. Okay. Oh, let me pull something up here. Because I usually talk about this book on the channel, but I don't know if we've ever actually looked at it. Let me pull up an example. This is from the Schaefer sight reading book. I'll put it on the screen for you. Yeah, okay. All right. So this is book 1. There are, I believe, 4 books of Schaefer sight reading exercises. Each book continues to expand upon and provide you with more difficult examples. So book 1, this is probably toward the end of the book. Yeah. Exercise number 40. It's called for flexibility. So all of the exercises in these books are intended to be played once. And not again, probably, or not again until you've definitely forgotten what it feels like and what it sounds like to play it. So here are a couple sight reading tips for you. First of all, anytime we're going to sight read something, our eyes always need to be looking ahead at things. And unless we're presented with a really, really long piece of music, we can kind of get a head start on that by doing some things at the beginning that can help us along. So, of course, you know, things that we talk about all the time are going to be things like, look at the key signature. We're in G major. We know that we have a 1 chord there and a 1 chord here. So I'm starting by doing some quick analysis, which is going to help me execute this when it comes time to play it. Let's take a quick look at, okay, chords. We have left hand. Left hand has a lot of chords here. It's in 2/4 time. I see right away 5th finger in the left hand is going to move down by step and then up by step. And we just have a single note, and then same pitch, down by step, same pattern. In fact, it's the same pattern in the right hand also. I can also look and see in G major, this depends a little bit on your current ability level, but if we know some theory, and we can do a quick analysis, right? This is a 1 chord. I'm not going to put things, should I? Yeah, we'll put things in inversion, I guess. Okay, so those are the first 2 lines there. I've just written in a couple Roman numerals for us. If we have an understanding of Roman numerals, and so for example, G, our tonic, our 1 chord in G, our 5/7 in G, or there's a little bit of a better resolution. If we're familiar with those, we can use that knowledge to really help guide our hands where they need to be as we play this. So I will always begin, if I'm doing an example or if I'm working with a student on a relatively short example, we'll begin with analysis like this. We've done some left hand. If we do, Miguel says, it's the Schaefer sight reading book. I will type it in the chat, actually. As soon as I get my cursor on it. There we go. And it's published under, the cover has his name on it, but on IMSLP, if you search for Schaefer sight reading, you'll definitely find it. Yeah, but it is published, I think it was published under a different name, or IMSLP lists 2 names. Anyway, Schaefer is one of them. Okay. Back to this real quick, and I see we've got some other questions, so great. I'll finish up with this, and then we'll get into Pavel's question and go from there. So we've done some left-hand analysis. We can do a quick right-hand analysis, and we can see thumb starts on G, which is just the 1st scale degree. This whole time, we're sticking in just our standard 5-finger position, except for this note. That's different. And then we're back. Okay, so as I look at this, these are all the things that my eye sees very, very quickly. If we have a longer example, our job is to hopefully be able to read things 2-3 bars ahead of time or so, or our eyes are glancing over and they're still gathering all of this information. Hello, Sir Wolseley. So that's purely looking at the page, right? If we translate that to what does it feel like if we can't look at the hands and can't look down? Let's see. Username, you asked this. So how comfortable are you being able to find the same chords across the keyboard without looking for them? So for example, if I'm playing a G major tonic, I'm not going to look at my hands. G major in inversion. Here's G major in another inversion, D7, G. If I go really far away, can I find it? Probably not. No, I lost it. There's G in the left hand. So what I'm using is actually not, because G is such a white key predominant key, I can't use really feeling where the black keys are very much. I'm using purely muscle memory about moving around in this key. So you can practice that by saying, can I close my eyes or look away and start with just near middle C or something? Can we play, maybe let's start with playing arpeggios. Here's one that will slowly crawl up the keyboard. So not looking. Okay, can we get that to be nice and fluent, right? Can we play our inversions in G? Can we play cadence patterns in G? See, not looking. There's G. I had to look down. So can we play cadence patterns? Just our typical, without looking. Can the left hand move down? Without looking, can it move down again? Yeah. Can we change inversion? Can we go here? Let's see. See? Right? Can we find... So this doesn't have anything to do with reading a page yet, but purely building this muscle memory. Can we find being able to go from the three main chords in a cadence pattern? So 1, 4, 5, 1. And can we navigate around without looking at that? First, that's really, really, really important that we be able to do that. Can we also play a scale without looking down? Doesn't have to be fast. That's not the point. But can we find the notes? Sometimes, in G major, it's really hard. Sometimes you can use the black keys as kind of a reference point to being able to find where we are. In G major, that doesn't work real well. Yeah, does not work. Okay, so all of that is important. So then when we come back here and we start to recognize all of this analysis that we did between one chord and the inversion of 5 and a 5-7, and then here we move into the relative minor down there. We can see all of that, and we've experienced all of those chords technically, physically. We've experienced those away from reading anything. So it's always a great idea to practice sight reading in keys that you're very comfortable with. It's going to be extraordinarily difficult to sight read anything if we're not familiar with the chords, the diatonic chords, and the cadence pattern, and scales that go with the key. So if I give you, let's just read through this. So there we go. The knowledge was all of those things. The knowledge to do that was all of those things we just talked about. Knowing where those chords are, 1, 5, the relative minor. It's the same. It was the same thing, just stepped down and changed in mode. Yeah. So let's see. Let me go back up. That was a question from username. So username, did that help answer your question? And do you have any follow-ups on that? I'm happy to continue to help if you do. So let me know. Yes, yes, yes. And also feel free to download the Schaefer book that I put in the comments there, or in the chat. Great. I'm going to go back through some of the questions that we missed in the meantime. And let's see here. Antonio said, you agree about Einaudi, pleasant and conceptual, but perhaps not so stunning. Yeah, totally. Sometimes, harmonically, sometimes stunning. There's an occasional piece that he writes that you go, whoa, I love that voicing and that chord and how it was approached. But I think they're more reserved to moments and not more. Thanks, username. Yeah, feel free if you have any follow-ups, please let me know. Pavel had said earlier, and Miguel, were you asking where I live? I live in the United States. I live in Colorado Springs, actually. So it's 10:21 in the morning here. And, okay, Pavel had asked, at what age does an average pianist have a more or less fully developed technique? So Pavel, gosh, that really depends on a lot of things. I think music lessons basically get divided into, let's say, 3 groups of people, in that there are people that start at a very exceptionally young age, 3, 4 years old sometimes. There's a movement today to a little bit of stop that from happening, at least at the piano, except for kids that have already an incredible attention span, and start to get into regular, traditional lessons at slightly older age, like 6, 7, 8, instead of early. But regardless, we have kids that are very young that begin. There are, let's say, kids also in their teens. I know a handful that have started piano around 14 or 15. And brain development is very different, at 4 years old and 14 years old. And then we have basically adult learners, people that start, let's say, 30 years old and up. And I group all of them together. They're not all quite the same, but I group them together because the biggest neurological difference has already happened in development. So just quick, science background. At a very, very young age, kids have an exceptional ability to just soak up information. They can learn a tremendous amount in an extremely short period of time if they can pay attention. What they don't have at a super young age is great dexterity and great muscle control, and that develops over time. And then we get let's say the teen beginners, who probably have the best of both worlds. They're still young enough that they have fantastic ability to learn new things, and they also have developed enough coordination throughout doing many other activities in their life that they have a great awareness, body awareness, and they can incorporate much better control learning an instrument right away, right on day one, than a young child is going to be able to do. When we pass that and we go into adult learners, we have all of that dexterity and all of that coordination, but the brain isn't as good anymore at learning new topics, at learning new things, especially if it's something that you haven't worked on in the past. If it's in a field that's totally different, or if it incorporates any type of thought process that is different than the synapses, the connections that we've built in the past, it can be challenging. I wish I remembered. I was listening to a podcast about this. I wish I could remember the name of it. I think it was a podcast by Peter Attia, and he had a world-class French horn player on. So Peter Attia is actually a doctor, I think, and he deals with continued health, especially physical health, mental health, into old age, let's say, from adults for forever and on. And so it was a very interesting podcast because the premise of it was about how, for this French horn player, he played for, let's say, into his mid-20s. He was incredibly successful. He completely changed careers. The reason for that is not really important to what we're talking about today. But he changed careers, and he ended up finding, because he became a scientist, he ended up finding out all of this stuff about the brain and how there are phases in life where we are very good at very different things. And so if we can learn how to exploit those things that we are thriving at our current time, we can really, really progress much more quickly than if we try to do things like in a way that would have been successful a decade or 2 decades earlier for the same person. Okay, all that to say, going back to the question here, which was from Pavel. There it is. Okay. It is to put an age on a fully developed technique is incredibly difficult. Because part of it depends on when that person began piano, and part of it depends on the amount of time that they've put into learning the instrument, and part of it depends a little bit on some sort of innate talent for developing certain muscle coordination. I'm a big believer that we can learn a lot of things, even if we don't have great talent in a certain area, but talent can definitely speed up the process. So if you have a great certain kind of muscle coordination that is innate in you, that allows you to play the piano and probably do other things similar very well, like type. If you type 100 or 100 plus words a minute, that would be a similar skill, and it's partly learned and partly not. There are people I know that have typed for years and years and years, and they can't come close to that. So it depends on all of those things. Let me say one more thing, and then we're going to move on to another question. When I find that from my experience teaching the little kids and teens, they end up reaching technical proficiency and very advanced technical accomplishment, usually around the same ages. So like the pianist who starts when they're 14 can end up being able to apply to a fantastic conservatory for college, be accepted, maybe get a scholarship, playing equivalently difficult repertoire as the child that started when they were 4. That's not always the case. There are some exceptions, but I think they're limited to being exceptions. At least in my experience, they are. Where the really young students, there ends up being so much else going on in life, and they're not really focused on the piano. And it's a thing that's dabbled in, 1, so there's not a tremendous focus. And 2, because of the lack of body awareness and good coordination, they don't always end up learning technique really well the first time around. And so they have to end up unlearning things. This is exactly my case, actually. You have to end up unlearning things that you accidentally or incorrectly learned when you're very young, and then relearn a better, more correct way, usually in your teen years. And in a sense, it's not quite like, but it's almost like starting over. And you end up starting over at about the same age. For adult beginners on adult piano and adult learners, I think it's highly dependent on, 1, how much time you're putting into practicing, whether you're going to be able to achieve really great technical proficiency in 4 years or 10 years, depends on a lot. And I would say most of all probably depends on how good your teacher is. There's a tremendous amount that you can learn, on your own online. But there's such certain mental connections already built. We have to be sure that what we're familiar with and what we know is really being optimized in the piano lessons. And when that happens, I've seen adult players learn almost as fast as the teen players, let's say. So be able to go from level 1 to level 5 in 1 year, where a child that's 4 would take 5 years for that. But I think a lot depends on, we really have to make sure that the time is spent efficiently and with a really keen eye toward how the body's being used and what the thought process is, because we're going to have to probably do a whole lot more thinking and analyzing of what we're doing than someone that's very, very young. They're going to learn it by muscle memory older learners are going to learn it more by grasping concepts. Miguel asked right just now, when did you start playing the piano? I started unofficially. I started teaching myself when I was 3. That sounds a little crazy. So let me give you a little backstory and then we'll continue on. I have an older sister who played. She was always playing the piano. She took lessons from the time I was born. So I was around it a lot. There was a grand piano in the house, a baby grand in the house. And I would go to, the piano studio to sit in the lobby, and just because I had to, I was 2 years old. And that, I actually was just thinking about this a couple of weeks ago. My first ever memory of piano is actually sitting in the lobby of the piano studio where my sister took piano lessons and hearing like 6 different piano lessons going on. And it was just chaos, sonic chaos. Much like when I went to college and, you have a hallway of practice rooms. So anyway, in my late 3s, I started just dabbling and trying to pick out notes of what my sister was playing. And then I ended, because we had the music book sitting around the house, I taught myself how to read notation. And at that point, my parents said, we should probably get you some lessons. So I started lessons officially when I was 4 to 4.5 years old. And pretty much had a lesson every week, at least one lesson every week from that time until I finished my master's degree in piano performance when I was, 24. So 20 years of weekly lessons. Let me jump back up. Oh, let's see here. Oh, jumping back into sight reading, Bachward's fellow had a comment, practicing scales and arpeggios, parallel contrary motion, all keys, all octaves, in 6th and 10ths with your eyes closed. That's great. We have Bon Jovi here, so hello, Bon Jovi. I'm sorry I didn't see you earlier. And Miguel, you're saying sight reading is a fundamental ability, and you in particular need to improve it. It definitely makes learning music a lot easier. Let me see what other questions we have, because I have stories I can share. And there was one that occurred to me just now, but let me answer some other questions if we have them first. Oh, Antonio has a question. Antonio said, what would you say were the most important changes in interpretation and style from the 1950s to today? Oh, gosh. I'm sure there are going to be exceptions to this, so feel free to point them out if you know of them off the top of your head. In general, I characterize kind of the golden age pianists, let's say just from 1900 to 1950, 60-ish, as, in general, having a much more straightforward approach to music. Rubato isn't luxuriated in. It's taken, but it's taken it's taken subtly, let's say. Not as greatly as what you would hear today. And even the physical way of approaching the keyboard is very different. If you watch most pianists from the early part of the 20th century, there's a lot of just playing straight in and down to the bottom of the key. There aren't big hand gestures. There aren't the flourishes that you see a lot of today. Whether or not there is anything related to like Taubman technique, which wasn't developed back then, it's hard to know how a pianist would have incorporated that, because the underlying elements of it we can't exactly see at a full speed performance. So if the great pianists from the early part of the 20th century, they may have been utilizing some of those things before they became codified, and before they became things that were accessible. So they just had a talent to understand, well, if I move in this particular way, it's going to make this easier. And that a lot of people don't have that ability to see that connection. And so I think there are a lot more really great pianists today than there were 100 years ago or so. In particular, because there's so much study about how the body moves and how the brain works, and it is so much more readily accessible to everybody. I think that covers it. Today's pianists in general, there are a lot of pianists they take tempos to their extremes, both fast and slow. Phrases are stretched and stretched and stretched. And I think it's beautiful. I think there's a place for both kinds of pianist if we just group them into two categories only. Not everybody has that preference. But those are the things that stick out to me immediately as the differences between, let's say, early 20th century and late 20th century or pianists today, and how they approach playing the music. And I think, listen to somebody like Emanuel Ax. I think that is someone who you can see the gap being bridged between those two generations, if we call it that. Because he starts to push things in directions that they hadn't been, but his technique isn't so dramatically different than what came before. So he's someone that I think of right off the top of my head that you can kind of see as you watch him play. You can see the change happen from, pianists like, early Pollini and Van Cliburn and Rubinstein, to who we see today. Evgeny Kissin is, I'd say, a modern exception to that. I think he plays a lot more like an early 20th century pianist, even though he's touring today. Juan, let me jump down because I see people following up on what we were just talking about. So Juan said there's something called neuroplasticity, and that allows us to keep learning and improving ourselves in older stages of life. Yes, if we have kept the brain plastic. Yes. So usually music lessons are really difficult for people if they have been, like, let's say someone retired, they haven't done anything. They have maybe read the newspaper, watched some TV, gone on walks, and they've gotten bored after a couple years of that, and they want to take lessons. Sometimes when something like that happens, the brain has lost plasticity, and it can be very difficult to gain it back. But any of those exercises that we can do, any mental exercises to keep the brain engaged on a day-to-day basis, no matter what age we are, the more of that we do, the easier it's going to be to learn anything. Still, that being said, there is research that shows that learning new concepts is always easier at a younger age than an older age. And we're usually better at synthesizing. So putting things together in ways that other people haven't seen, things that we've already learned. So creating new things becomes easier. And that is extremely difficult for people, nearly impossible for people that are younger, because the brain just doesn't work that way. Oh, let's see. Ahmed, you've asked twice about the Dvorak piano concerto. Are you going to play that, Ahmed? I can take a quick listen, I guess. I'm not incredibly familiar with it. I couldn't hum you any of it off the top of my head. But let me pull it up. And, somewhere I can pull that up. And in the meantime, let's see. Bon Jovi asked, do you have any practice plans for late elementary? Yes. Let's. Well, you'll hear a little bit of it off my phone, but I'm going to take a quick listen to the beginning of the Dvorak and see if it rings a bell here. Can people hear that or no? Ahmed, are you talking about the finale and the final movement? Yeah, it must be. Let's hear some piano playing. Yeah. I like the piece. I am actually not familiar with it. I don't know anyone personally that's played it. So there's that. Miguel asked, do you recognize directly the notes that are sounding? No, I don't. I don't have perfect pitch. I have very good relative pitch. Ahmed says, top 10 hardest concertos ever written. Huh. I mean, it's long. I'd have to take a look at the music and see exactly what's going on technique-wise. But yeah, I guess I could kind of hear that from the brief little bits. It seems just the quick listen I've taken. That was nice. Fairly classically inspired. So, I don't know. I'd have to take a look at the music to really give any more comment on difficulty or something like that. But yeah. Cool piece. Thanks for sharing it, Ahmed. And 11 against 10. 11 against 10, I don't know. That's I would say equally challenging as 3 against 2. That 11 against 10 doesn't have to be any harder than 3 against 2. It's all about feeling the big pulse. And so once we can feel the big pulse, 11 against 10 is just, we just play it and we line up the pulse where it's supposed to be. Miguel, have you studied any piano concertos? Yes, a few Mozart, Bach 2, Beethoven, I want to say 5. It was a while ago. Oh, the MacDowell Concerto. That was the one that I played a lot. I almost forgot that I'd played it. It's not known very much. Edward MacDowell, he was a student of Liszt, so it's Lisztian in ways. If you count Rhapsody in Blue as a concerto, I played that. And Gershwin's Concerto in F. I'm jumping back up in the comments. Oh, yes. So I was going to answer Bon Jovi's question, practice plans for late elementary. So if you've got, let's say, an hour a day to practice, Um, Gosh, I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record if you've listened before, but we need a regimen of scales and arpeggios that we do every day. We need a little bit of playing chords and cadence patterns that we do every day. I try to tell my students to limit their technique practice time to about 20%, 25% of their total practice time. We don't want to spend so much time practicing only technique that we're not working on music, because there'll be plenty of technique we can still work on while we're playing actual repertoire. But it's really important to get scales and arpeggios in our fingers because they happen so often in pieces of music. There's so much that becomes easily playable once we have those. Most important, I say at the beginning, most important is developing efficient, relaxed, good technique in playing all of that stuff, not speed. Speed will come when it's supposed to come. Speed will come, it'll come naturally. You won't even realize that you're speeding up because it will just feel easy. And then it'll take work to slow down and play with a metronome. I'm not a huge fan of playing with a metronome in practice, but I do think, especially at earlier levels, we need to instill a really great sense of pulse. We can do that a couple different ways. We can just play, snap, play on the lap pulses. We can step around the room, right? We can just walk. Walking is a pulse. It has a pulse. Sometimes, if we're stuck at the piano and we can't do those things, we can pull a metronome out. But I almost never ask a student to actually play a scale with a metronome or to play a passage from a piece of music with a metronome. We'll put the metronome on, we'll check a tempo or establish a tempo, we'll internalize the tempo, and then we go and we play. Now, if there's a problem where the tempo isn't maintained over the course of whatever the duration is that we're working on, then we address that in some other way, like finding a physical way to represent the tempo that's not playing the piano. Because the biggest disconnect is that we're not internalizing it. And that's really what we want to happen. We want to feel the pulse through everything. So having that as something that we practice, even if it's just listening, you can establish a great sense of pulse by listening to and counting along with and or conducting along with, especially Baroque music. Put some music on and conduct some basic beat patterns, and we'll be moving the body through space, feeling pulse in extremely rhythmic music. And that can be a great way of feeling that. So anyway, 20-25% of time spent on technique and things like that, and then we work on repertoire. And depending on, I guess, late elementary, that means different things to different people, but I'm going to just say 2 to 3 pieces of music. If you mean late elementary is, like early method book stuff, maybe we can work on more than that. We might be able to work on, 5 to 10 pages in a method book. If it's level 1, level 2, I'm thinking in particular of like the adult method books, the all-in-one method books by Alfred and by Faber. If you're working through one of those, early in them, we can work through 10 pages in a week. Later in them, we might work through 5 pages in a week, and that might be 5 pieces. We might have 5 things going on at a time. And to a point, the more advanced we get, the fewer pieces we're working on, to a point, and depending on what your goal is. But so for the rest of your hour, 45 minutes or so spent on working on your repertoire. If you have time beyond that, I love giving my students composition assignments. And so that would be something that you could add in. If there's a piece you're playing, analyze the piece you're playing harmonically, theoretically, however you can at your current level, and then take some time over the course of a week or two to write something of your own that models the ideas you see presented in the piece. However you want to notate that down. If it's in notes on a page, fine. If it's in a voice memo, fine. whatever. That's not that important at the early stages. But getting thinking about music a little bit differently and feeling it as a creative thing, that's really important. It can also help teach us all of those things that we talked about sight reading. You're going to start developing those during your time doing these little compositions, because you're going to be thinking totally differently. You're not going to be reading notes. You're going to be thinking about music and what it sounds like purely. Backwards Fellow said, practice schedule also includes some time for sight reading. Yes. Let me see. This was Bon Jovi that asked this. I think, right? Oh, yes. Bon Jovi, if you aren't already signed up for my email list, this is a little pitch. There isn't a link in the description, but they're all over my YouTube page and on my website. When you sign up for the list, you get a practice schedule. You get 3 blank, not totally blank, but they're forms that I've created for you to fill out a practice schedule for the month, for the week, and by day, with questions to ask yourself about each practice session, ways that will help guide you through how you need to plan things out, places to put down, the scales you're working on, the technique you're working on, how much time you're dedicating to sight reading, the repertoire you're working on, and have it written down. You can keep it on an iPad, you can write it in, you can print them out if you want. You can develop your own if you want to. That's fine too. But I've made them for you, and you get the PDF download with a page of instructions of how to use it, how to best use it, if you just sign up for the email list. It's automatically delivered. So if that's something you're interested in, go ahead and sign up. I also did a video on this channel explaining it. If signing up for an email list isn't your thing, you can watch the video that's on the channel, and I show you most of the pages that are in the PDF that you're going to get anyway. And you can develop your own practice schedule and kind of format from there. And that's totally fine too. So it's there just to be helpful in one way or the other for you. I'm going to shoot myself in the foot here, but also limit your time on YouTube. Because sometimes it can suck us in and we can kind of get over, we're gathering information and all that, but, we can watch one video and we can practice the concept delivered in one video for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So if we try to absorb too much information, we're not going to be making a whole ton of progress. So, yeah, anyway, I appreciate you being here, and please don't leave the stream. But, yeah, the rest of the day, just keep an eye on how much time you're spending consuming learning content, educational content, versus applying it, and make sure that stays in a good ratio for you. Okay, I'm going way back up. Is Mark GT still here? I appreciate all of the chat. I cannot keep up with it today, but it's awesome. Now I lost the comment. Mark GT had asked, I like to play pop songs which involve multiple octaves with notes that are usually a few steps apart. I watched your video and tried focusing on my 5th finger. Any more tips to improve accuracy? Okay. So, Mark, yeah. If you're playing stuff that's got octaves in the left hand, or whatever, let me make something up real quick. There's kind of a typical pop progression. Walking bass line. The things that are going to be really important, Mark, are instead of only focusing on one leap at a time, which would be very useful in, maybe the video you're referencing is like a waltz video where we have to play things that are like that. That can be great for focusing on one finger on 5 because of the leap. That's a really big leap. But try playing a 5-note scale in octaves. Try playing your arpeggio in octaves. So I'm doing these in A because that's just the key that I picked. Can you do a walking bass line down with the left hand? So stepping down the scale to the 5th scale degree, going back to 1. Can we do skips back and forth? So I'm adding 1 note down, 3rd down, 4th down, 5th down, and back to 1. I would love for you to practice that kind of stuff to get a little bit of that muscle coordination in about what it feels like when we don't have these aren't large leaps. If it's just steps, we just need to practice feeling those steps and those leaps. We can develop all sorts of exercises to do that. You can take the piece that you're working on or the couple pieces that you're working on and develop your own exercise out of what the left hand is presenting or what the left hand challenge is. You know, if you have a leap of a 6th and that you're missing all the time, let's develop an exercise that helps us find that. Like, how about a 3rd down, a 5th down, a 6th down. And that's gradually widening. When we go from just a short leap, those aren't going to be nearly as challenging to find the notes. And then when we have a larger leap, yes, combine aiming for 1 finger, usually 5, with some of the motor memory that we're going to be building simply by doing it over and over again. If we can do that away from music, if we can do that away, I'm just reading some of the comments that came in. If we can do that away from the score and away from reading anything, that's really going to help. Yeah, that's really going to help solidify that kind of thing for you. And scales, I know scales aren't the most fun thing to play, but don't underestimate. If you play scales in octaves, that can be really good. And do it if you're playing pop music, play your scale in the same, in the key, but also play it in the key of the 4 chord and in the key of the 5 chord. And that'll get you around most of the notes that you're going to need in a piece of pop music. Thanks, Mark. I'm glad you're still here. Let's see. I have to scroll so far back up. If I missed anybody's question, please feel free to let me know if I'm still reading through things, but if I haven't gotten there, feel free to type it in again. There's been some interesting talk about some of the other topics, about ages of students and things like that. That's great. Let's see. So Miguel had a question. You said you're reading some Albanese, and it's really difficult to read these pieces. Any advice about probably reading pieces that you're not used to playing, or reading pieces? Yeah. Yes. Okay. My primary advice, if it's a composer you haven't played much before, first goal should be coming to understand what compositional components that composer uses. How do they like to structure things? What kinds of things get repeated very often? They might not be note for note repeated, but how are the concepts repeated? Are arpeggios used in a certain way, in a certain arrangement, in a certain voicing? You know, you just think about the difference between arpeggios in Beethoven and in Rachmaninoff. We call them arpeggios in both cases, but they're extraordinarily different from each other, and they feel completely different to play. If you've played Beethoven and you've not played any Rachmaninoff before, Rachmaninoff is going to feel very strange. because it's a new idiom, right? It's a compositional idiom that we need to learn. So that's just one example. But go through your pieces and find out, do a little analysis, what is different than we usually see, but how can you make it into a pattern? Where can we find those patterns, and where can we find that they repeat? Because most composers are going to write things like that. There might be a few very modern suggestions. There might be a few very modern composers that don't exactly fit that bill. But for most tonal music, we're finding what gives that composer their voice. What are those things? And that is going to be, that's going to directly translate once we start to feel that, and we see those arrangements of notes, those voicings, those techniques being employed. We see them in 1 bar, we see them in 2 bars, we see them in 3 bars. We feel them in those bars, and then we can start to say, oh yes, that's how this feels. And then no matter how much you start to play by that composer, you will start to understand the idiom that they wrote in, and every piece after the first piece is going to be that much easier to read, to sight read, because you've become familiar with their musical language. We never Sir Wolseley, thanks. I just saw the end of the chat here. We never talk about the idioms of, well, not often do we talk about the idioms of composers like Bach and Mozart and Beethoven and Chopin, because they're played so much. I think we assume that, people are just familiar with them. But if you think about the first time you learned a piece by a particular composer, that first piece is always the one that's the most, in a sense, the most challenging, because you have to learn how they wrote music. So going back to your question, that's what I would do, with the understanding that the first 1 or 2 pieces that you read by any particular composer that's different, it's going to be a learning process. We're going to have to figure that knowledge out. And the more precise, the more efficient we can be with figuring out what the idiom is that the composer is writing in, the faster we can apply it to music in the future. Think about, I'm not saying it's easy, but think about, again, arpeggios in Beethoven. If we have things that are... something like that. That was very, very, very difficult, and that was the pinnacle of technical achievement, in a sense, in Beethoven's time. Third movement of the Moonlight Sonata, incredibly hard, and it pushed people's technique so far. We think about that today, especially if we've played a lot of Beethoven. That, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's easy-ish once we know how Beethoven writes and how he uses the hand to play music, right? So yeah, Miguel, you said you remember your first Bach being very weird, and now you're quite used to it. Yeah, Bach is one of those I find, he feels totally different to play than just about every other composer. Great stuff. Oh, let's see here. I know Bachward's fellow said, limit my time on YouTube. I know. You don't have to take my advice. Let's see. I may be caught up, but let's see. Dith had a question here. Hello, Dith. I don't know if I got to say hello to you. Dith said, you're going to be traveling on business for a week. Any tips on what you should do while you're gone, because you're concerned about losing practice momentum? Yes. So, Dith, I would... can you let us know what pieces you're playing? To just start with one example, and then if you've got a couple others that you're working on, drop those in the chat. The first thing I will say while Dith is doing that is, one, don't practice on a tabletop or on your lap. I have it's a pet peeve of mine. I don't think that moving the muscles in that way is actually helpful in any way at all, because we have unless you can bring a keyboard with you. For example, let's say you want to do something as simple as practice a D major scale. Now you want to do that on your lap or on a table. There is no way, without having the keys here, that we're going to know for sure if we're moving the fingers the right way, with the right amount of space, playing with enough force or too little force or anything, or playing the F sharp. So those are the reasons why I significantly dislike practicing on a tabletop away from the keyboard. I wouldn't do that. There's also one of the other things that I've mentioned before is that there's no sound. For obvious reasons, there's no piano in front of us. When there's no sound, our hand isn't responding to what our ear is hearing. And our entire job, no matter what level we are, our entire job at the piano is to make music. Practicing motions away from the sound that they create is probably doing more harm than good. Because our ears need to be telling us what to do with the hand. The hand doesn't control the music-making process. The ear does. Okay, that being said, so Dith, you said level 4 RCM type rep. CPE Bach, Clementi Sonatina 2. Okay. Let's see, you said third movement and a weird contemporary one called Sunset. Third movement. I have the Clementi handy, so I'll pull that up. Is it this one, Dith? Great. Okay, so that's the one. Okay, you can apply this to all of your other pieces, but I'm going to talk about this one in particular since I had the music up and handy. Okay. I'm not sure what fingering you're using, but if we, zoom in here, there are some finger choices. Are you doing the alternating ones or not? That's most important just for you to know that. But let's take a look at just these first 4 bars. So just that much. I did. So if we have those first 4 bars, can we take the right hand by itself away from the piano? You can even practice this today before you go on your trip. Even sitting at the piano, okay? Can we close our eyes, be on the bench? Well, first, don't close your eyes. Look down, see the keyboard. We see where it is. We see where we're positioned. We recognize everything, right? Let's try to ingrain that in our memory. So when we close our eyes, can we still see the keyboard as it is in front of us? When we need a reminder, just open our eyes and take a look. Is it still the same? Do we still see the same thing? Okay, number 1. 2, let's start by taking bar 1 here. Can we place our hand, right hand to start with, on the first notes we need for the first bar? Once again, let's try to take something like a snapshot of that. Can we look down? Can we see what the hand looks like? Can we even play it looking? Just that much, maybe? Can we close our eyes, take our hand off the keyboard, but still visualize the same thing that happened? Can we see ourselves playing Just those first 4 pitches, bar and a beat. Can we do that with both hands together? Can we see it first? Then can we put our hands in our lap and visualize that? What I'm starting to take you through is learning to visualize practicing the music before we get totally cut off from the instrument. So we have an ability to check in, to reconnect, let's say, the visual as we need to by just opening our eyes and looking down. We can reconnect that. We can play it again. Right? Maybe we also add something else in the middle of this. Maybe we also can say, if you're working on memory especially, can we close our book, turn off your iPad, not look at the keys, and can you still play the first 4 notes? Can we do that for the first 4 bars? So, and then close our eyes or look away. That's close to what it was. There it is. Okay. And then, can we take the hands away from the keyboard again? Put them in the lap. Don't move the fingers as we play, but visualize, see yourself playing the passage. Can we see ourselves while we look at the score? Can we hear what the passage sounds like while we look at the score? The whole thing, both hands together. And then can we stop looking at the score? Can we still visualize what it looks like to play it? Okay. Start doing that while you have some time at the piano. And as you learn how to do this, anytime you have to go away, anytime you're not at the piano, anytime you need to practice something else, you're, on the train, taking public transit, on a flight somewhere, you're away, you're at a coffee shop and you have 10 minutes. And you say, oh, I could use 10 minutes instead of, surfing Facebook. We could practice something for 10 minutes at the coffee shop. Pull up your score, and we can practice by using visualization techniques. The first component is the one that we talked about, and this is going to serve you very, very well in the meantime. Being able to see what we're doing and see it go and hear in our inner ear what the music is supposed to sound like. Maybe an intermediary step here is also if you have a recording of the piece that you've been listening to as you're studying it, can you listen to the recording but visualize yourself playing while you listen to the recording? And then we're helping bridge one of those gaps. We're giving the ear some information that it needs, but we're visualizing our hands doing the movement. The final component of this is coming to an understanding, and I don't think this is going to happen for maybe years more of study. That's not a bad thing. Just have patience with yourself is what I'm saying. But the final step is being able to feel in the body what it feels like to play a passage while we look at it. And anything that you know really well is a perfect example, is a perfect way to begin doing that. So then when we close our eyes and visualize, we are seeing our hands actually execute the passage. We're hearing it in our inner ear, and we're feeling, almost in a sense, like we're triggering the movement, but we're not. We're not allowing the movement to be triggered. But we can sense, we can feel exactly what it's like for the hand to play the notes. When you've achieved all of that, sometimes this is divided into many more levels. I'm kind of grouping it into 3, but this basic principle is called audiation. I was talking about it on Facebook about it with somebody just yesterday, I think. Martha Argerich is a very famous pianist today who can do this perfectly. She doesn't even have to have practiced a piece of music. She can look at the score, memorize it, feel what it's like to play it, and then first time sitting down at the piano, she can play it. Totally fine. She might be one of the best currently alive at doing that. But there's a story about Rachmaninoff learning one of his concerti, it may have been the second piano concerto, while he was traveling to the US. He didn't have a piano with him. He practiced all of it in his mind, showed up, had to give a performance. First, I think it was the premiere. And he had almost no time on the piano bench. So I'm giving you kind of the beginning steps, well, more than the beginning steps, a lot of steps. Take as many as you want or can fit in before your next trip, and go from there. Okay, so we took 4 bars, take it in small groups, and then when you're comfortable, or if you feel like it's going great already, can you sit down with the score only and visualize yourself playing the whole thing? Try to even put yourself in the familiar environment of your home where you practice. Can we go that far? So it's not just some keys that are floating, on a black background when our eyes are closed, but can we actually feel like we're putting ourselves in that space that we're used to practicing? For other people here, I'm going to take this one step further. For anybody who is interested in taking that to the next level, I may have mentioned it on stream before, but if you're planning on playing any concerts or you have recitals, even if you're just studying, and even in Dith's case, maybe in the future, you're working up to this, maybe you're working up to taking the exam for RCM Level 4. Can you find, this is usually easier for playing concerts, but can you find a picture of, can you visit the location where you're going to be performing? And can you take a photo of it? Can you remember? I do this whenever I'm playing in a new space, one that I am not used to playing in, a hall that I haven't played in before or something. I will go online. I'll find a picture of the hall. I will desperately look for a picture of the hall from the stage, not from the audience perspective. And I will visualize myself playing the performance on a piano in that space. So then, when I actually walk out and play, it doesn't feel like it's the first time. There's, in a sense, been some practice. So, Dith, those are my suggestions. It's all about visualizing music. I haven't really gone into depth about that anywhere on the channel. So, there you go. Great question, though. Really great. And for everybody else, even if you're not going on a trip, you can still use these concepts anytime. Like I said, you're at a coffee shop for 10 minutes. Or you're on the bench and you want to really kick your practice up a notch. Take a few minutes. It's amazing the power a few minutes of visualization can have, just stopping executing things for a minute, 2 minutes, something like that. The passage you're working on, visualize it, stop playing, then play it again. We can use it on a daily basis in practice too. All right. Hey, if you're here and you haven't already clicked the thumbs up for this video, could you do that for me, please? I would appreciate it. Dith, I'll answer your next question, and then I'm going to see, there was some other stuff about pianos. Yeah. So Dith asks, is it worth it for an adult learner to take the RCM exams? I think that completely depends on you and your personality type. If the exam is going to push you to accomplish more and you enjoy the preparation for it, absolutely go for it. I would be somebody like that. If I were an adult piano learner, I would be taking the exams. Absolutely. Because I like having very concrete goals. I structure most of my day that way. So, oh, thanks for all the likes. A bunch of likes came in. Thank you. So if you're not that kind of person, though, I would question whether the exams are really worth it. If you're doing this purely for fun, is it really worth it? If you want the feedback, the positive and the negative, it's worth it. If you're afraid of getting feedback, especially the negative stuff, and there's a potential that it might cause you to stop, quit, something else that'll be very bad, I would not take the exam. So, like I said, it depends on your personality in particular. I have a slew of adult students that absolutely do not want to take any exams. They get their sense of accomplishment by finishing pieces, We make recordings of the pieces together. And it's still enjoyable for them. Yeah, Dith said, the rubric and the structure are great. I assumed your teacher would be your exam. I would ask them if they have a particular reason that they want you to do it. That would be good to find out. But yeah, showing up. If it's not something, if you don't want the certificate and you don't really want the feedback, yeah, it's a time commitment on a day, and it's going to be busy and chaotic. If you're not interested in experiencing the anxiety of playing for others, I wouldn't do it. If that's not what music is about for you, I wouldn't expose yourself to that. If it is something, if you do want to play for people, then it would be a great thing to practice, whether we like it or not. Yeah. Great, great, great. Let's see. Okay, so jumping back up to OCD King said, and I see I see a lot of people have commented back about this. You said, I'd like to move from digital to acoustic, but you're concerned about how loud it might actually be in your house. Any tips for buying an acoustic that won't overwhelm the home with beginner noises? Let's see. And Sir Wolseley... let's see, that was a different comment. Antonio said, if you can afford it, consider buying a hybrid piano. That's a good possibility. Sir Wolseley said, heavy blanket on the top and behind, rug under the piano. So OCD King, it depends a little bit on exactly how much distance you have to your neighbors. And if you're a beginner, you're also not going to be playing as loudly, practicing your stuff as I would be playing. So, for example, when I practice here, this is a house, so the neighbors are in another building, and there's a little bit of yard between everybody. You can definitely hear my practicing outside in the backyard. You can hear it outside on the street in front of the house. You can't hear it inside anybody else's house. But I would say a lot of beginner pianists, you're not going to be playing, fortissimo, and you're not going to be practicing that heavily. So even in a case in like my current setup, a lot of beginner pianists, you probably wouldn't be able to hear the piano even outside the house. And this is fully acoustic. So one thing to consider is simply how heavily are we playing and what's the circumstance. In anything that's like an apartment, any piano is going to be somewhat too noisy, especially at nighttime. I even have heard stories about concert pianists renting apartments in Manhattan that have to move. Even though they made everybody aware of what they did for a living, they couldn't practice during the day because people would complain. And they had to practice to make a living. Anyway, big problems. So going back to pianos in particular, what Sir Wolseley said is great. You can use blankets to do a lot. I'm not always a fan of that because it changes the overtones of the instrument and we can end up playing harder than we need to, and we don't get to hear the really singing and beautiful quality of the piano. There are a lot of acoustic pianos, uprights and grands, that have like a silent player system. They're usually on the more expensive side of things. So you can plug in a pair of headphones and you still get the benefit of having an acoustic piano when you want it. But when you plug in the headphones, it mutes all of the acoustics. The hammers still move, but they trigger only an electronic sound. So you have the feel of an acoustic piano, and you still have your one instrument. You're not buying a separate digital or a separate acoustic. And very, very simple. You just plug in, and it mutes the acoustic, and then you can play anytime as loud as you want. W.S. Jade says you have a hybrid, a disclavier. A disclavier, I would say, is not actually a hybrid in the sense that I think we're talking about hybrids. A disc clavier, yeah, can capture and can play back. I was thinking of a hybrid as being something like the Yamaha, I think it's the Avant Grand or something like that, which has like a faux acoustic cabinet, and it has, you know, the acoustic piano action and all of that. So it's hybrid in that the action is acoustic, the sound is completely digital. There aren't any strings. There's nothing vibrating. It's just speakers attached to a soundboard to make it more resonant. That's what I was thinking of as hybrid. The disc clavier systems that I have played, I haven't noticed a difference in them. Now, they've only been on CFX Grands. That might be the reason why, or if they were the really, really high-end disc clavier systems. But I've played performances on disc clavier pianos that have the box attached, and you have to be careful not to run your leg into it while you're playing. But playing on it didn't feel any different than playing on a plain old acoustic concert grand. So I don't know. I'm sure you have had a different experience. So I'm sure that there are many other people that have had that as well. The best way to figure that out is go try the instrument you're considering. Okay, maybe that's so. Once you're practicing daily on it, maybe that does. You feel more of the difference when it's that regular of a thing. Yeah. And let me see. I'm looking for. This was OCD's King's comment, right? Just the last little thing is, if you're considering a new instrument, really good, nice digital-only pianos are quite good. Now, they don't get you an acoustic response necessarily, but there are a lot of benefits. There really are. And if you're in a position where the sound is going to be a big problem, getting a mid-tier digital piano, something that's mid-tier in US dollars is somewhere around like $2,500 to $5,000. That is always a thing. I see your new comment, OCD King. A digital only can be great in those situations. And I've mentioned this on streams before. I go from my acoustic to my digital to practice regularly because I enjoy having the difference in feel. And if I would be bummed if I only had the digital for sure after having this piano for a long time. But I could definitely live with it. And I could practice just fine for everything that I would need to. Yeah, so OCD King, what Sir Wolseley just said, if you're in a single family home, if you already have a digital, use that to practice when you really don't want people hearing you, like family and stuff. And then go practice get an acoustic, just a plain old acoustic piano, and then you'll have that all of the other times. I think that's probably your best solution right there. Because if you don't have to worry about the sound traveling to neighbors or other people being upset, I know everybody's family is a bit different, but hopefully they know that you're learning, and they'll, give you some grace when you make mistakes and things like that, because mistakes are just a part of practice. I've made mistakes my whole life in front of people. Even in, practice rooms at university, you can hear everybody in the rooms next to you. So, yeah. Bachward's fellow said you've been pleased with your P125. The P125 is pretty good. That's significantly less expensive than the digitals I was just referring to. It can be okay. I have found on the P125 it can be really difficult to play softly, just the way the action feels. And even once you tweak some of those settings a bit, it can still be difficult to get like a true acoustic feel playing softly. So that's one thing that I watch out for. Username, I'm not familiar with that. Is that a Yamaha? Or is that a different brand? Oh, WSJ said on a note of noise concerns. You live in an apartment. You've never had any complaints practicing on an acoustic grand during daytime, even at fortissimo. With lid completely up. But you cover completely what during the day? So it is totally possible. Cool. And username said it's the NUX brand. I have not heard of that. I'll have to check that out. Backwards Fellow has a comment about setting up a P125, the action setting and the volume. And my concern still with that is that the feel of the key going down, which you can't change with the electronics, still doesn't feel like, it doesn't feel anything like my home piano. It feels completely different. It doesn't feel like this, and it doesn't feel like my digital. And so I always find myself having some issues to work around, even if I change settings and things like that. Oh, cool. Seems like we have mostly wrapped up questions today. If there are any last minute ones, I can take a few more. Otherwise, this has been a really great session. Richard P. is here. I haven't seen Richard. Richard, I haven't seen you in a long time. Oh, Sparrow said Miguel still had a question. Miguel, what was your question? Can you type it in, or can somebody type it in Miguel's question, because I cannot find it. Miguel's question is, what is ragtime? Okay, thank you, Sir Wolseley and Sparrow. Okay, awesome. Julio, is your question, what is ragtime? Let me answer Miguel's question, and then, okay, we have a bunch more here. I'll answer a couple more. Okay, so Miguel's question was, what do you think, reading many pieces at the same time, like reading 5 pieces, different levels, but it's too much. So that really depends on the amount of practice time you have per day, I'd say. 5 pieces at different levels, that could be okay. I would say you probably want 2 to 3 hours of practice a day if you're working on 5 different pieces of music. If only one of them is challenging in the sense, like technically challenging, maybe you could get away with closer to 2 hours of practice. But in order to really, really work through 5 pieces like that, we're just going to need more time. And if you don't have that kind of time, then yes, 5 is going to be too many, and I'd cut that down to 2 or 3. 2 or 3 I feel like is a nice sweet spot. We get to cover a variety of different things at the same time. And for most people don't have that many hours a day to sit and practice. There are other life obligations. So, yeah. Miguel, you have quite a bit of time. So, I mean, if you've got those hours, and you feel like devoting it to learning piano, then 5 pieces, you can go for it. 3 to 4 hours a day. Then 5 isn't too many. 5 is probably a nice sweet spot for that much time, because we do want to stay engaged over the course of practice and make sure that we're not hammering one thing over and over and over again. So that's Miguel. That's my answer for you. Yes, 5 is fine with that amount of time. If you run out of that amount of time, I'd cut your pieces down. Set a timer and make sure that we're not sitting on one piece for too long of a period. You know, maybe 30 to 45 minutes on one piece at most before changing something up. Doesn't mean you can't come back to that piece later in the day, but give the mind and the ear a little bit of a rest from those before we jump back on it, either later in the day or the next day. Julio's question was, what is ragtime? Well, ragtime is, specifically, it's a genre of music that originated in the United States. Traditionally, it's all played by ear. I think I saw earlier somebody said a piece like the Maple Leaf Rag, a piece like the Entertainer. So it has components, subtle components of some jazz in there. Sometimes there can be like stride piano type left hand, like that's what's in the Entertainer. It's not technically stride because the notes don't follow exactly what needs to happen, but we have these jumping things that happen. Scott Joplin is the most famous ragtime composer. I don't know how much more I have to share with you about ragtime. If you want some more complex and more recently composed ragtime piano, William Bolcom wrote a whole set that can be really fun to play. So you can look up William Bolcom. That's Bolcum, I think, or Com. Type in either of those with piano and you'll probably find it. Okay, cool. Let's see. So that covers Julio's question and Miguel's question, and then we had a couple more just come in. Hyper Joe. Hello, Hyper Joe. Hyper Joe says, besides scales and Hanon, what else would you recommend adding to daily practice? Arpeggios and cadence patterns. Depending on your level, Hyper Joe, what kind of repertoire are you playing, or what level, if you follow a guideline or a rubric, what level are you? Because there might be some other changes, some other things to add to that. Sorry, Woolsey, thanks for that. While Hyper Joe types that in, the Ossia, how do you get the overhead camera angle? Well, hello, first of all, and what gear, attachments, software, etc. So when I do overhead, I don't do it on live streams. The closest I have is this camera that's here that I haven't used yet today, which is that guy. So that's if I needed an overhead on live. That's just a big camera on a big tripod. When I do it on other videos on the channel, I use my iPhone. It's just a phone, and I have a large microphone stand that goes way up and comes out and over my head, and there's just a little like a gooseneck with a spring-loaded clamp on the end. So the phone is always it's not plugged in. Don't need to have it plugged in. I record it up there, and then I take it down and grab the video file off. And then I edit everything in DaVinci Resolve. This obviously is not that. So this is a bit different than when I do a standalone video, but that's how I do it, and I think that's what you're asking about. So iPhone, a little gooseneck that I can just clamp on to a big mic stand, and it's got a spring-loaded clip on the end that can fit Most of the time I use it for my phone, but it can also fit like things like little LED lights that I use once in a while and some other things. But it's specifically made as a desk clamp for phones. So, if it looks like a desk clamp and that it's got these rubberized things that can just squeeze down on a surface, and then a really long gooseneck, so you could have your phone up and doing something, recording you at a desk without having to hold it. I just use it for a bit of a different purpose. And then software, DaVinci Resolve for editing. There is a free version of that, by the way. If you're interested in editing using that platform, you can get the studio version for free. And if you buy a nice camera, buy Blackmagic, who makes DaVinci Resolve, comes with the professional version for free, which otherwise I think costs you $300. The stripped down free version is still extremely powerful. So yeah, definitely check that out. I switched from using Premiere, Adobe Premiere, years and years and years ago, and I'd never go back. Great. Let's see. Hyper Joe. See, you said at the moment you can play Prelude in C major, The Long and Winding Road, and Imagine. We've got a lot of C going on, Hyper Joe. Even The Long and Winding Road. That's in, well, starts in C minor. And then we're in E flat after that. But, okay. So, you said scales. You're doing scales in Hanon. I would add to that, yes, arpeggios. And since you like pop music too, cadence patterns. So those are the two things I mentioned. Cadence patterns are 1, 4, 1, 5, 7, 1. Do them in all your inversions. And so get to know all of those. And at least in the keys of the pieces you're currently working in, maybe add one other one at a time. For arpeggios, they can just be standard old arpeggios. I'll keep going in C since we have a lot of rep in C, but your usual 3-note. Those would be fine. I would do those, gosh, lots of keys. I would actually start by doing diatonic, the arpeggios of diatonic chords in the keys of the pieces you have. So, in C major, the primary ones are going to be the same as we used in the cadence pattern. The 1 chord, C, the 4 chord, F, the 5 chord, G. Practice those. As you can add to that, you can also play, we've got, 1, 2, there are 7 diatonic chords. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, there are 4 more other than those 3. If you want to add those in, that would be the next place to go. And in the meantime, we're just going to be learning and learning and learning. And when we get to new keys, there are already going to be these extra arpeggios and things that you know about. When you practice scales, I would also do a couple other things. Hopefully, make sure that you're always playing scales in at least 2 octaves. As soon as we can get away from 5 fingers, and I think you're beyond that by what you said in your comment, get away from 5-finger position, get away from just a single octave. It's not very hard to go from 1 octave up to 2 octaves. There's just 1 more finger cross. So 2 octaves at least. And I would also start you on playing scales in accelerations. Scales and accelerations means we establish a tempo, a metronome tempo, and then we play 2 octaves in 8th notes. Then we play 3 octaves in triplets, and then we play 4 octaves in 16th notes. You might want to start with something like 60 beats per minute. Something like that. 8th notes will feel extremely slow, but 16ths will be pretty quick depending on where you are with your scales and how much you've done, if you've done 4 octaves or not. So I would add that into your scale practice. Lastly, Many of you probably knew this was coming. Limit your time on Hanon. And if you really are going to play Hanon, just make sure we're doing it in a very healthy way. None of the lifting the fingers up like page 1 of the book says. Don't do that. That will cause problems that will take a long time to fix. I know a Bachwards fellow who is here is a big fan of transposing the exercises in Hanon. You can feel free to do that as well. You know, if you want to take number 1 and play it through all the diatonic chords. So the next one would be D minor. Yeah. You can go from there. And that gets you at least out of the white key only that the entire Hanon book is written in. Yeah. Great. Let's see. That was Hyper Joe's question. I hope that helps you out, Hyper Joe. And thanks for tuning in. Oh, yes. And Sir Woolsey, you said you had your piano tuned. I'm seeing that. Hope you can, Bachwards fellow said, hope you can make some recordings. We'd love to hear that. We'd all love to hear that. Bo Bachwards fellow says use harmonic minor for Hanon. So. Something like that. Okay, great. Thanks for chiming in on that, Bachwards fellow. And okay, I think. Oh, Anton had a question. I'm going to hit Anton's real quick, and then Julio's, and then I think we're going to call it a day. Anton's question was, how do you quickly switch camera views? I have a dedicated video switcher that's in front of me. I can pull it a little bit onto screen here so you can kind of see. I've got this little box in front of me, and I've got a bunch of HDMI cables going into that, so I can switch to this guy or my iPad, and sometimes I have a computer hooked up as well if I need to grab video from another source. It's called the ATEM Mini Pro, ATEM Mini Pro. That's also by Blackmagic Design. Can you tell I'm a fan? So that's how I switch camera angles for the lives. But like I said before, all of the standalone videos on the channel are all edited in post, just on the computer separately. I don't do any of the editing live, and I don't use OBS. A lot of people use OBS for lives and for creating videos. I don't happen to use it. It's not my preferred way of doing it, but it works for a lot of people. Let's see, Julio. Okay, what's the best camera angle for videos for masterclass for sending in here? You say your tablet is your only recording device you have, and it's a conundrum of where to place it. Yeah, I would say the more you can mimic this angle. This is my primary angle. This is always where I teach from when I teach online. Virtually, and most of you know if you watch videos around the channel, when I'm demonstrating things, this is always the primary angle. So if you can approximate this, looking down the keyboard, you can see both hands clearly. I'm sitting really close today because of all the gear around me, but even if I was sitting further away, you'd see my whole body in the shot. Torso, some of the legs, both hands equally visible. So if you can approximate that, that would be great. And it's up high enough that you can see, like, we're not looking so low at the keyboard that it all just looks like one, tiny row of white keys, but you can actually see from the upper notes all the way down. That's super important. So Julio, if you've got some kind of iPad holder, or even, they make... they look like little music stands that have an iPad attachment to them that you can use. That works. If you have a music stand lying around the house, I've used that before with an iPad to capture video. It can be a little tricky to get the angle so you can actually see the keyboard if it's not suspended. But that would be a place I would look. Worst case, if that is absolutely not possible, whatever you can send in is going to be fine. But yeah, if you're looking for ideal, the kind of a profile is what I like to call it, raised up a little bit so we can see both hands. Thanks, Miguel. Okay. Whew. Did I... Sir Wolseley said, can you play a few bars of Rock 2 second movement? I cannot. I haven't played that piece since I was 17. I haven't touched... I mean, I've listened to it many times, but I haven't played almost a lick of it since I was 17. So no, I cannot play any. It's been a long time since then. Yes. No, I'm not one of those people that... I've had some teachers that, like, when they've performed something once, they can play it for the rest of their life. I am not one of those people. It would take consistent practice to be able to just play anything. Yeah. And that was half a lifetime ago or so. So no consistent practice on that piece. Thanks so much to everybody who is here. I apologize if I missed anybody's question. I hope I didn't. It definitely is not intentional. So if I did miss, just feel free to drop a comment below the video, or always tune in next time. I think, what are we doing? We're doing this again, not next week, but on August 9th. August 9th will be the next live stream. So as always, you can remember to send in anything that you'd like some feedback on for the masterclass segment. Thanks to everybody for being here. If you, some of you have been here since the very beginning, so thank you for that. If you've joined and haven't clicked that like button, could you please? Thank you. And lastly, what we started with today, if you're a fan of Ludovico Einaudi, I have written a new 6-song EP that comes out on Friday. There's a link to pre-save it in the description. If you would do that so kindly, if you like that style of music. No pressure if you don't. But I'd really appreciate it. Anyway, thanks everybody for being here. It was great to meet a few new people, and great to see some old friends. Awesome. So until next time. Yes, username, hope to see you again. And Sparrow, hope to see you again. Miguel. And of course, Sir Wolseley, Juan. Awesome. Bachwards fellow, if you're still here, it's always a pleasure. Richard, good to see you. WS Jade, thanks for tuning in. I know I'm going to miss somebody if I don't say everybody. Hyper Joe, thanks for being here, Hyper Joe. All right, everybody. Keep practicing. Smart practice. I got to come up with another... Do I have to come up with another way of ending videos? I don't know. So practice smarter, not harder. And I'll see you next time, August 9th.